I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, hands trembling as I clutched the doctor's report. 3 words stood out in bold black type. No cognitive impairment. 3 simple words that would give me back my life, my dignity, my future. For 6 months, my own son had convinced everyone, my friends, my neighbors, even my other children, that I was losing my mind, all to gain control of everything I'd spent a lifetime building. But now, the truth was typed on official letterhead, and I finally had proof that I wasn't crazy. I was just inconvenient. My name is Eleanor Pembroke. I'm 68 years old, and until last year I thought I knew what betrayal felt like. I was wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The chill of early October seeped through my cardigan as I walked across the lawn of what used to be my home, a sprawling Victorian in the quiet suburb of Millfield, Connecticut. The maple trees I'd planted 30 years ago now towered overhead, their leaves turning brilliant shades of amber and crimson. I'd raised 3 children in this house, nursed my husband through his final illness, and planned to live out my remaining years surrounded by memories and the garden I'd cultivated for decades. That all changed when my oldest son, Richard, moved back home after his divorce. "It's just temporary, Mom," he'd assured me, his expensive leather suitcase thudding on the hardwood floor of the entryway. "Just until I get back on my feet." Richard had always been ambitious, sometimes ruthlessly so. As a financial advisor, with one of Boston's prestigious firms, he'd built a life of luxury that crumbled when his wife discovered his affair with a colleague. The divorce left him emotionally raw and financially strained, with hefty alimony payments and a damaged reputation in his professional circles. I welcomed him with open arms, of course. What mother wouldn't? I prepared his favorite meals, listened to his bitter diatribes about his ex-wife, and gave him the space to heal. I even suggested he take the master bedroom, my bedroom, since it had an attached office where he could work remotely. "That's ridiculous, Mom," he protested. "But I could." See the calculation behind his eyes. "I couldn't possibly take your room." 3 days later, he was installed in the master suite, and I was sleeping in the smaller guest room at the end of the hall. Looking back, I realized that was the first red flag. But at the time, I was simply happy to have my son home again, to feel needed and useful after years of rattling around the big house by myself. The change wasn't immediate. It was subtle, like water slowly rising around my ankles, barely noticeable until I was suddenly drowning. It started with small comments, scattered like breadcrumbs throughout our conversations. "Mom, you've already told me that story twice today," he'd say, his tone laced with exaggerated patience. Or, "Mom, didn't you just take your blood pressure medication? I swear I saw you take it an hour ago." I hadn't, of course. I'd been taking my medication at the same time every morning for 15 years without issue. But Richard's certainty made me doubt myself. I started keeping a small notebook, jotting down when I took my pills, what conversations we'd had, what errands I'd run. One evening, while preparing dinner, I couldn't find my favorite chef's knife, the one my late husband had given me for our 30th anniversary. "Richard, have you seen my good knife?" I called from the kitchen. He appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a glass of my late husband's expensive scotch in his hand. "It's in the drawer where it always is, Mom." "No, I've checked there. It's not in its usual spot." He sighed heavily, set down his drink, and made a show of opening the drawer and pulling out the knife. "Right here, Mom, right where it always is." I stared at the knife, confusion washing over me. I could have sworn I'd checked that drawer twice. "Oh," I said softly. "I must have missed it." Richard's expression softened into something resembling concern. "It's okay, Mom. Everyone gets forgetful sometimes." But I wasn't being forgetful. Not then. I discovered later that he'd hidden the knife while I was in the garden. then replaced it before coming to find it for me. I only learned this because he accidentally mentioned it to my daughter, Caroline, thinking she was already in on his plan. Over the next few weeks, things began to disappear regularly. My reading glasses, my house keys, the remote control. Each time, Richard would find them for me, usually in obvious places I knew I had already checked. Each time, his concern would grow more pronounced, his voice lowering to speak to me as one might address a child. "Mom, this is the third time this week you've misplaced your glasses," he'd say, loud enough for my neighbor Margaret to hear when she dropped by with a loaf of freshly baked bread. "I'm starting to worry about you." The seeds of doubt had been planted, not just in my mind, but in the minds of others. Margaret's eyes lingered on me a moment too long, her smile a bit too sympathetic. "My mother went through something similar," she said gently. "It's so hard to watch them decline." I was standing right there, but they spoke as if I'd already faded away. By Thanksgiving, Richard had convinced my younger son Michael and my daughter Caroline that I needed to be monitored. He showed them the notebook where I'd been tracking my medication, evidence, he claimed, of my deteriorating mental state. "She's keeping strange records," he told them in hushed tones while I was supposedly napping. "Making lists of things that never happened, conversations we never had. I'm really worried." What he didn't tell them was that he'd been moving my belongings, gaslighting me for months, making me question my own sanity. And it was working. I'd begun to wonder if perhaps I was indeed slipping, if the fog that seemed to follow me was a symptom of something more sinister than simple aging. The breaking point came on a snowy evening in December. I was preparing for the annual Christmas party I hosted for the neighborhood, a tradition spanning 20 years. I'd spent the day baking cookies and preparing appetizers, my arthritic hands aching from the effort, but my heart full at the thought of seeing friends and neighbors. Richard came downstairs as I was arranging a platter of cheese and fruit. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "Getting ready for the Christmas party," I replied. "People will start arriving at 7. His face fell, and he approached me slowly, placing his hands on my shoulders. "Mom, the party was yesterday. Don't you remember? Everyone came. You seemed a little confused, so I helped host. Dr. Martin was here. He suggested we make an appointment to have you evaluated." I felt the room spin around me. There had been no party. "I would have remembered, wouldn't I?" "That's not possible," I whispered, but uncertainty crept into my voice. Richard guided me to a chair, his voice gentle but firm. "You've been having these episodes more frequently. Caroline and Michael agree. We need to get you help." I sat there, platters of food surrounding me, tears welling in my eyes. Had I truly lost track of an entire day? Had I hosted a party I couldn't remember? Later, I found the invitations I'd sent out, clearly stating that the party was scheduled for that evening, December 18th. But by then, Richard had already called my doctor, my children, and several close friends to inform them of my episode. Next morning, I awoke to find Caroline in my kitchen, making coffee and wearing the expression of someone preparing for a difficult conversation. "Mom," she said, sitting across from me at the table I'd refinished myself decades ago. "Richard told us everything. We think it's time to consider your options." "My options," I repeated, "for care, for the future. Richard has some paperwork he wants to discuss with you." The paperwork, as it turned out, included power of attorney forms, healthcare directives, and documents transferring ownership of my home into a trust that Richard would control for my protection. "It's just a precaution," he assured me as he spread the documents across the dining room table. "This way, you won't have to worry about managing your finances or maintaining the house as your condition progresses." "My condition?" I asked, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I don't have a condition, Richard." He exchanged a look with Caroline, the kind of look adults give each other over the head of a difficult child. Mom, you've been showing signs of cognitive decline for months now. We're just trying to make things easier for you. That afternoon, Richard brought over his friend Nathan, who happened to be an estate attorney. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They sat me down in my own living room, speaking slowly and clearly, as if I were already half gone. Mrs. Pembroke, these documents will ensure that your assets are protected and your care is guaranteed, Nathan explained, sliding a pen toward me. I didn't take it. I want to see my own lawyer, I said firmly. Richard's smile tightened. Mom, we've already discussed this with Hamilton. He agrees this is the best course of action given your condition. Hamilton Pierce had been my attorney for 30 years. I couldn't believe he would approve such arrangements without speaking to me directly. Then I want to talk to him myself, I insisted. He's away on vacation, Richard said smoothly. But he left these documents for you to sign before he left. He knows how important it is to get your affairs in order quickly. Something cold settled in my stomach. A feeling I hadn't experienced since the night I realized my first husband was lying about his whereabouts. It was the physical sensation of betrayal, of realizing someone you trust is manipulating you. I'm not signing anything today, I said, standing up. I need time to think. Richard's expression darkened momentarily before he caught himself and forced his features back into a mask of concern. Of course, Mom. Take all the time you need. We're just trying to help. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in my kitchen, the house eerily quiet around me. The home that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a trap, its familiar walls closing in. For the first time, I truly questioned my sanity. Was I really experiencing dementia? Had I imagined the inconsistencies in Richard's stories, the convenient timing of my supposed episodes? With shaking hands, I reached for my phone and called the one person who had always been honest with me, even when the truth hurt. My oldest friend, Diane, who lived in Arizona now but had known me since college. Ellie? Her familiar voice came through the line. Is everything all right? It's late there. Diane, I whispered, afraid Richard might hear me from upstairs. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Always, she replied without hesitation. The last time we spoke, on Sunday, did I seem confused? To you? Did I repeat myself or forget things we'd discussed? There was a pause, and my heart sank. Then Diane spoke, her voice clear and certain. Ellie, you were sharp as a tack. You remembered details about my granddaughter's recital that even I had forgotten. Why? What's going on? Relief washed over me like a wave, nearly bringing me to tears. I told her everything. Richard's return, the missing items, the fabricated Christmas party, the legal documents. My God, Ellie, she breathed when I finished. He's gaslighting you. This is elder abuse. But what if I am experiencing episodes? I asked, the doubt still lingering. What if I'm forgetting things and don't realize it? Then you need a proper medical evaluation, she said firmly. Not from Richard's doctor friend, but from a specialist with no connection to your family, and you need to call Hamilton right now. Richard said he's on vacation. It's worth checking. Call his office first thing tomorrow. The next morning, I waited until Richard left for a meeting in the city. As soon as his car disappeared down the driveway, I called Hamilton's office. Pierce and Associates, how may I help you? His secretary answered. This is Eleanor Pembroke. I need to speak with Hamilton urgently. Of course, Mrs. Pembroke, let me see if he's available. My heart pounded as I waited. If Hamilton was truly on vacation, then perhaps Richard had been, telling the truth about other things as well? Eleanor? Hamilton's familiar voice came through the line. What can I do for you? The relief nearly buckled my knees. You're not on vacation? No, he replied, confusion evident in his tone. I'm right here in the office. Why? My voice trembled as I explained the situation, the documents Richard wanted me to sign, the claim that Hamilton had approved them. Eleanor, I haven't spoken to Richard in months, Hamilton said, his voice hardening. And I certainly haven't prepared any documents transferring your assets or power of attorney. This is extremely concerning. What should I do? I asked, fear and relief battling within me. First, don't sign anything. Second, I'm coming over this afternoon. And third, I think you should schedule that medical evaluation, not for the reasons Richard suggests, but to establish a record of your cognitive health. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring out at the garden where spring bulbs were already pushing through the soil. Tulips and daffodils I'd planted decades ago, returning year after year despite harsh winters. Something about their persistence strengthened my resolve. I reached for my notebook, the one Richard had used as evidence of my decline, and began to write. Not scattered notes about medication or errands, but a detailed account of everything that had happened since Richard moved back home. Every lost item, every fabricated event, every manipulative conversation. By the time Hamilton arrived at 3 o'clock, I had filled 12 pages. He read through my notes carefully, his expression growing grimmer with each page. When he finished, he looked up at me, determination in his eyes. Eleanor, what Richard is doing isn't just unethical, it's potentially criminal. Elder abuse takes many forms, and psychological manipulation is one of them. But how do I prove it? I asked. It's his word against mine, and he's already convinced everyone I'm losing my memory. Hamilton tapped my notebook. This is a start, but we need more. We need that medical evaluation from an independent specialist. He made a call from my kitchen, speaking in hushed tones to a colleague who specialized in elder law. When he hung up, he had the name of a neurologist at a respected memory clinic in Hartford, one with no connections to Richard or his circle. I've scheduled an appointment for you tomorrow morning, he said. I'll drive you myself. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to Richard moving around in what used to be my bedroom, wondering how the sweet little boy who once brought me dandelion bouquets had turned into a man who could systematically dismantle his mother's reality for financial gain. The evaluation at the memory clinic was thorough. Cognitive tests, blood work, brain scans, hours of questions and exercises designed to assess every aspect of my mental function. Dr. Sharma, the neurologist, was kind but meticulous, testing and retesting areas where she sensed Richard had focused his manipulation. Mrs. Pembroke, she said when we finished, her dark eyes direct and honest. I see no evidence of dementia or significant cognitive impairment. Your memory, reasoning, and executive function are all within normal ranges for your age group, actually above average in several areas. The rush of validation was so intense I had to grip the arms of my chair to stay upright. Then I'm not imagining things? The incidents my son described, they're not real? Based on what you've told me and the results of these tests, it appears your son has been deliberately manipulating your environment to make you question your memory and perception. It's a form of emotional abuse called gaslighting. Can you put that in writing? I asked, my voice stronger than it had been in months. In a report? Dr. Sharma nodded, her expression solemn. Absolutely. I'll prepare a comprehensive report detailing these findings, which you can share with your attorney and family members. And Mrs. Pembroke, she leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly. What your son has been doing to you is not just cruel. In this state, it's potentially criminal. As Hamilton drove me home, the doctor's report secure in my purse, I felt something shifting inside me. The fog of doubt lifting, replaced by a clarity that was almost painful in its intensity. For months, I'd questioned my own mind, my own memories. Now I knew the truth. I wasn't losing my grip on reality. Someone I loved had been deliberately trying to pry my fingers loose. What do I do now? I asked Hamilton as we turned onto my street. He glanced at me, his eyes, faded blue behind bifocals he'd worn as long as I'd known him, resolute. Now, Eleanor, we fight back, and we start by walking into that house with your head held high, knowing exactly who you are. I clutched the doctor's report in my hand as we approached the front door, the door to the home I'd bought with my late husband, the home where I'd raised my children, the home Richard had tried to steal from me, one misplaced object at a time. It was time to reclaim what was mine, beginning with my dignity. The moment I walked through my front door with Hamilton beside me and the doctor's report in my hand, I knew something had changed. The house felt different, an almost imperceptible shift in the air, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Richard's sleek black sedan wasn't in the driveway, but Caroline's practical blue minivan sat where my gardening truck usually parked. As Hamilton and I stepped into the foyer, I heard hushed voices from the living room. Caroline and Michael, my youngest son, who I hadn't seen in weeks despite him living just 30 minutes away. They fell silent when we appeared in the doorway. Caroline sat perched on the edge of the sofa, her fingers nervously twisting the silver bracelet I'd given her for her 30th birthday. Michael stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel where photographs of our family through the years were displayed, or had been, until recently. I noticed now that several were missing, including one of me receiving a community service award just last year. "Mom," Caroline said, her voice faltering slightly, "we didn't know you had gone out." "Clearly," I replied, my voice steadier than it had been in months. "Hamilton was kind enough to drive me to a doctor's appointment in Hartford." Michael's eyes darted to Hamilton, then back to me. "Richard said you weren't supposed to drive anymore. He said you got lost coming back from the grocery store last week. Another fabrication. I'd driven to that same grocery store every Tuesday for 20 years. "That's interesting," I said, setting my purse down deliberately on the side table. Considering I haven't driven anywhere in 2 weeks because Richard hid my car keys, he told me I must have misplaced them. Caroline and Michael exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Mrs. Pembroke has just undergone a comprehensive neurological evaluation," Hamilton said, his voice carrying the weight of his 40 years in legal practice. "I think you'll both be interested in the results." I removed the sealed envelope from my purse and placed it on the coffee table. Neither of my children moved to take it. "What kind of evaluation?" Caroline asked cautiously. "The kind that definitively determines whether someone has dementia," I answered, "which Richard has been telling everyone I have." Michael shifted his weight, looking suddenly like the little boy who used to get caught sneaking cookies before dinner. "Mom, he's just concerned about you. We all are. You've been forgetting things. Getting confused." "Have I?" I asked, meeting his gaze directly. "Or have things been mysteriously moving around this house? Have conversations been invented that never took place? Have events been fabricated?" Caroline stood up, her face flushing. "Mom, this is exactly what we're worried about. These paranoid accusations, they're not accusations if they're true," Hamilton interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "And they're not paranoid if there's evidence." I felt a sudden, fierce gratitude for this man who had been not just my attorney, but my friend since my husband and I bought our first small starter home decades ago. "Open the report," I said, nodding toward the envelope. Michael was the one who finally reached for it, breaking the seal with his thumbnail and unfolding the official letterhead of the Hartford Neurological Institute. His eyes scanned the document, widening slightly as he read. "Patient exhibits no signs of cognitive impairment or dementia," he read aloud. "Memory function, executive reasoning, and cognitive processing all test within normal to above average ranges for age group." He looked up at me, confusion written across his face. "I don't understand." "I think you do," I said quietly. "Your brother has been systematically manipulating my environment to make me, and all of you, believe I'm experiencing cognitive decline. He's been hiding my belongings, claiming I've forgotten conversations we never had, and inventing episodes of confusion. But why would he do that? Caroline asked, her voice small. Hamilton cleared his throat. I believe the stack of legal documents he's been pressuring your mother to sign might provide some insight into his motivations. I watched as understanding slowly dawned on their faces. Caroline's hand moved to cover her mouth, and Michael sank into the nearest chair. The trust documents, he muttered. The power of attorney. He said it was all to protect you. It was to protect my assets, I corrected. For himself. A key turned in the front door, and we all turned as Richard walked in, briefcase in hand, his expression shifting rapidly from surprise to calculated concern when he saw us all gathered in the living room. Mom, he said, his voice immediately adopting that patronizing tone I'd grown to detest. You shouldn't be out without letting someone know. We were worried. Were you? I asked, my voice steady. Or were you counting on me being safely tucked away while you convinced my other children that I'm mentally incompetent? Richard's eyes darted to the open report in Michael's hands, and something cold and calculating flickered across his face before he composed himself. I see you've been to some kind of doctor, he said carefully. Mom, we've discussed this. Dr. Martin is the only one who understands your condition. These other doctors don't have your history. Dr. Martin is your racquetball partner, I replied. And he's a dermatologist, not a neurologist. He has never formally evaluated me for anything related to cognitive function. Caroline turned to Richard, her expression hardening. Is that true? Richard set his briefcase down, straightening his expensive tie. A nervous habit he'd had since high school debates. Of course not. Dr. Martin referred us to a specialist. Mom must have forgotten. There was no specialist, I said firmly. Just like there was no Christmas party on December 17th, no episode where I got lost driving, and no conversation with Hamilton about transferring my assets into a trust under your control. The room fell silent. Richard's facade began to crack, just slightly, a tightening around his eyes, a muscle jumping in his jaw. Mom, he said, his voice dropping to a concerned whisper. This is exactly the kind of paranoid ideation I've been trying to help you with. You're imagining conspiracies, forgetting important events. Hamilton stepped forward. Mr. Pembroke, I'd advise you to stop right there. I have never spoken to you about your mother's estate planning, nor authorized any documents transferring her assets or decision-making authority. In fact, after seeing what you've been attempting to do, I'm considering reporting you to the State Bar Association for elder abuse. Richard's expression hardened. This is a family matter. It doesn't concern you, Hamilton. It concerns me when someone tries to use my name and professional reputation to defraud an elderly client, Hamilton replied, his voice ice cold. And it will concern the police if you continue this behavior. The word police hung in the air. Like a thunderclap. Caroline gasped, and Michael stood up abruptly. Richard, Michael said, his voice tight with anger. Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you haven't been manipulating Mom to get control of her money. Richard's eyes darted around, the room calculating. I recognized that look. The same expression he'd worn as a teenager when caught in a lie, already formulating his next move. You're all overreacting, he said smoothly. Mom has been showing signs of decline for months. Ask anyone, the neighbors, her bridge club, even Pastor Davis. Everyone has noticed. Because you've been telling them what to look for, I interjected, planting seeds of doubt, making sure they see what you want them to see. I walked to the sideboard and pulled out a small device I'd discovered hidden behind the family photos. Just that morning before leaving for my appointment, a tiny digital voice recorder. You've been recording me, I said, holding it up. Catching snippets of conversation you could take out of context, editing them to make me sound confused, then playing them for others as evidence of my decline. Richard's face paled. That's for my podcast, he stammered. It has nothing to do with— I found 3 more in the house, I continued. 1 in the kitchen, 1 by my bed, and 1 in the den where I take phone calls. Hamilton has already documented their locations. Caroline stood up, tears streaming down her face. Richard, how could you? This is Mom we're talking about. Richard's demeanor changed instantly, the mask of concern falling away completely. His voice became cold, angry. You have no idea what it's been like, he hissed. Working my entire life, building everything from scratch, only to lose half of it to Stephanie in the divorce. Meanwhile, Mom sits in this house, this massive, valuable house, alone, while her investments just accumulate interest. It's wasted on her. She doesn't need all this. The naked greed in his voice shocked even me, and I'd spent months watching his manipulation unfold. So you decided to take it, Michael said, disgust evident in his tone. Richard straightened, some of his professional composure returning. I decided to manage it better than she can at her age. Everything would still come to us eventually anyway. I was just expediting the process. By convincing everyone I had dementia, I said, my voice surprisingly calm despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. By making me question my own sanity. By isolating me from friends and family who might notice what you were doing. The room fell silent again. Richard's eyes met mine, and for the first time in months, he didn't pretend. The calculating coldness, I saw there broke something inside me. Not my resolve, but the last lingering hope that there was some explanation besides pure avarice for what he'd done. You should leave now, I said quietly. Richard laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Leave? This is my home too. My name is on all the household accounts now. I've been paying the bills for months. With my money, I reminded him. From my accounts, which you gained access to by forging my signature. Another thing Hamilton has documented. Richard's expression darkened. You can't prove that. Actually, Hamilton interjected, the bank has already confirmed the signatures don't match Mrs. Pembroke's on file. They've frozen the accounts pending an investigation. Richard took a step toward me, his face contorted with anger. You vindictive old— Michael was between us in an instant, his hand on his brother's chest. That's enough. Get your things and get out, or I'm calling the police. Myself. For a moment, I thought Richard might actually strike his younger brother. Instead, he straightened his jacket, his face settling into cold contempt. Fine, he said. But this isn't over. The house needs major repairs. The roof is leaking. The foundation has cracks. The property taxes alone will bankrupt you now that I won't be helping. You'll be calling me within a month, begging for assistance. I thought of the separate account I'd maintained for years. The one Richard knew nothing about, funded by the modest royalties from the children's books I'd illustrated in my younger years. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to keep me comfortable without touching my main investments. Goodbye, Richard, I said simply. He grabbed his briefcase and stormed toward the stairs, presumably to collect his belongings. Caroline collapsed onto the sofa, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Michael stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, looking simultaneously angry and lost. I'm so sorry, Mom, he finally said. I should have seen through him. I should have asked more questions. We both should have, Caroline added, wiping her eyes. When he told us you were getting confused, we just believed him. It was easier than facing the alternative. I sat beside my daughter, taking her hand in mine. The alternative being that your brother was capable of this level of deception? She nodded miserably. He's always been charming, I said softly. Even as a child, he could talk his way into or out of almost anything. That kind of charisma can be blinding. Michael paced the length of the living room, running his hands through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it made my heart ache. What do we do now? He asked. Press charges? Take him to court? Hamilton, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. That's for your mother to decide. There's certainly enough evidence for criminal charges of elder abuse and financial exploitation. At minimum, we should pursue a restraining order. I closed my eyes briefly. The weight of everything that had happened, everything I had learned about my own son, settling heavily on my shoulders. When I opened them again, I felt a strange sense of calm. First, I said, I want to secure my home and my accounts. Then I want to speak with each person Richard has poisoned against me. My friends, my neighbors, my other children. I looked pointedly at Michael and Caroline. I need to set the record straight. And Richard? Caroline asked hesitantly. I thought about the little boy who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, seeking comfort from the noise and light that frightened him. I thought about the teenager who'd forged my signature on a failing report card, the college student who'd borrowed money from my purse without asking. The pattern had always been there, just never so destructive, so calculated. I don't know yet, I admitted. But whatever happens, it will be my decision, not his. As Richard's angry footsteps echoed from upstairs, punctuated by the sounds of drawers slamming and closet doors banging, I felt something unexpected, relief. The fog of doubt that had surrounded me for months was lifting. The constant questioning of my own mind, my own memories, was over. I was Eleanor Pembroke, mother, grandmother, widow, homeowner. I was not confused, not declining, not losing my grip on reality. I was, however, losing a son, or perhaps more accurately, seeing him clearly for the first time. And painful as that clarity was, it was infinitely better than the manufactured confusion I'd been living in. Because this pain was real, it was mine, and no one could manipulate me into doubting it. The morning after Richard left, I awoke in my own bedroom for the first time in months. The familiar crown molding I'd painted myself decades ago greeted me as sunlight filtered through lace curtains. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed this space, my space, until I reclaimed it. After Richard stormed out the previous evening, Michael had helped me change the locks. Caroline stayed overnight, sleeping in the guest room that had been mine during Richard's occupation. The house felt different already, lighter somehow, as if a noxious gas had been vented from the rooms. I sat up slowly, savoring the simple pleasure of waking in my own bed without someone hovering, watching for signs of confusion they could document and later use against me. On the nightstand sat a small silver picture frame containing a photo of my late husband Edward, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners the way they always did when he smiled. I touched the frame gently. "You would have seen through him immediately," I murmured. Downstairs, I could hear Caroline moving around the kitchen, the familiar clink of mugs and the rich aroma of coffee drifting up the stairs. I pulled on my robe and made my way down, pausing at the landing to look out the window at my neglected garden. Spring bulbs were emerging despite months of inattention, nature's reminder that some things persist regardless of circumstance. "Mom," Caroline said when I entered the kitchen. She looked tired, her eyes puffy from yesterday's tears. "I made coffee. Hamilton called a few minutes ago. He's meeting with the bank this morning to sort out your accounts." I poured myself a cup, the familiar routine comforting in its normalcy. "Did Richard take much?" Caroline's expression tightened. "Hamilton thinks around 40,000 from your checking and money market accounts. But the investments are intact. Richard couldn't access those without your signature on additional forms." $40,000, a substantial sum, but far less than what Richard had been angling for with those trust documents. I felt a complex mixture of emotions, anger at the theft, relief that it wasn't worse, and a deep, aching sadness for what my son had become. "The police called too," Caroline added hesitantly. "They want to know if you're pressing charges." I sat down at my kitchen table, running my fingers over a small scratch in the oak surface, a mark left by Lily, my granddaughter, when she was learning to write her name. "I don't know yet." Caroline joined me, her hands wrapped around her coffee, Ugh. Mom, what he did was criminal. It wasn't just manipulation. It was elder abuse, fraud, theft. I know what it was, I said quietly. But he's still my son. A knock at the back door interrupted us. Through the window, I could see Margaret from next door, a covered dish in her hands. Caroline moved to open the door. Eleanor, Margaret said, tentatively, her eyes taking in my appearance as if searching for visible signs of decline. I brought over a breakfast casserole. I thought, with everything going on, you might not feel up to cooking. I recognized the look on her face. It was the same expression she'd worn for months now when speaking to me. That careful, overly patient tone people use with children, or those they believe are mentally compromised. Richard had gotten to her early, planting seeds of doubt about my competence. Thank you, Margaret, I said firmly, meeting her gaze directly. That's very thoughtful. Would you like to join us for coffee? There's something important I'd like to discuss with you. Margaret glanced uncertainly at Caroline, who seemed to understand my intention immediately. I need to make some calls, my daughter said tactfully, taking her coffee into the living room. Thank you for the casserole, Mrs. Winters. Once we were seated at the kitchen table, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Margaret, I've known you for 15 years. We've served on the library board together, organized the neighborhood watch program, gardened side by side. In all that time, have you ever known me to be forgetful, confused, or unable to manage my affairs? Margaret shifted uncomfortably. Well, no, but Richard said, Richard lied. I interrupted gently. He fabricated incidents of confusion, hid my belongings to make me appear forgetful, and systematically convinced people I was experiencing cognitive decline. I slid the neurologist's report across the table. Margaret scanned it, her eyes widening. But why would he do such a thing? She asked, genuine confusion in her voice. To gain control of my assets, I replied simply. The house, my investments, everything I've worked for. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I should have... She broke off, clearly struggling with her own complicity in Richard's scheme. You believed what you were told by someone you had no reason to distrust, I said. Many people did. But I need your help now, Margaret. Richard spoke to many of our neighbors, our friends at church, the entire bridge club. He's created this false narrative about me that I need to correct. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Of course, whatever you need. That conversation with Margaret was the first of many over the following days. One by one, I met with friends, neighbors, and community members who had been fed Richard's lies. Some were immediately contrite, horrified to learn they had been unwitting participants in his scheme. Others were more skeptical, Richard's poisonous, suggestions having taken deep root in their minds. Pastor Davis from First Presbyterian was particularly difficult to convince. Richard had apparently shown him edited recordings of me appearing disoriented, claiming they were evidence of my rapid decline. Eleanor, the pastor said when I visited his office with the neurologist's report, I understand you want to believe you're fine, but denial is common with dementia patients. I fixed him with a steady gaze. James, I said, using his first name deliberately, you officiated at Edward's funeral 12 years ago. In your sermon, you quoted Tennyson's Crossing. The bar because I told you it was Edward's favorite poem. Can you recite the first stanza? The pastor blinked, caught off guard. Well, it's been many years. Sunset and evening star, and one clear call for me. And may there be no moaning of the bar when I put out to sea, I recited without hesitation. The second stanza continues, but such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam, when that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. Pastor Davis stared at me, speechless. People with dementia don't typically retain poetry with perfect recall, I said gently. Nor do they drive themselves to appointments, manage their investments, or catch their adult children in elaborate schemes of financial exploitation. His expression softened. I see I've been misled. Forgive me, Eleanor. By the end of the week, I had reclaimed not just my home and accounts, but my reputation in the community. Hamilton had been instrumental, accompanying me to the bank where a sympathetic manager helped identify and reverse Richard's unauthorized transfers. The discovery that he had forged my signature on multiple documents strengthened the legal case against him, should I choose to pursue it. Michael had taken a week off work to help around the house, removing the surveillance devices Richard had planted and repairing the small acts of sabotage designed to make the house appear neglected. The disconnected downspout that caused water to pool against the foundation. The deliberately clogged gutters Richard had pointed to as evidence I could no longer maintain my home. He told us you'd stop taking care of the place, Michael said as he reconnected the kitchen disposal Richard had secretly disabled. That it was becoming unsafe for you to live here alone. While simultaneously making it unsafe, I observed. Caroline had been focusing on emotional damage control, particularly with her children, my grandchildren, who had been told by their Uncle Richard that Grandma is sick and might not recognize you. Lily, just 7, had been particularly confused and upset by this. Caroline arranged for me to spend an afternoon with them at the park, normal quality time that helped reassure them that Grandma was the same as always. After they left, I sat alone in my garden for the first time in months, surveying the beds that needed attention after a winter of neglect. Daffodils had pushed through despite everything, their bright yellow faces turned toward the spring sun. I made a mental list of tasks, pruning the hydrangeas, dividing the hostas, refreshing the mulch around the rose bushes. The simple act of planning garden work felt revolutionary, an assertion that I had a future here, in this place, capable and independent. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Hamilton. Eleanor, he said, his tone serious. The police detective handling your case called. They've been investigating Richard's finances and discovered this isn't the first time he's done something like this. My heart sank. What do you mean? 5 years ago, an elderly client of his investment firm filed a complaint alleging Richard had convinced her to liquidate her retirement accounts and reinvest through him. The funds disappeared, and Richard claimed the woman had authorized high-risk investments that unfortunately failed. The firm settled quietly and let Richard go. I closed my eyes, the pieces falling into place. Richard's sudden career change, his move to a different financial firm, his evasiveness about his professional history. There's more, Hamilton continued. They found documents in his apartment related to 3 other elderly individuals, detailed notes about their assets, medications, family relationships. The detective believes he was selecting his next targets. A chill ran through me despite the warm spring day. He was planning to do this to others. Yes, which brings me to the difficult question we've been avoiding. Eleanor, the district attorney wants to know if you're willing to testify against Richard in a criminal case. With your testimony and the evidence they've gathered, they believe they can stop him from doing this to anyone else. The weight of the decision pressed down on me. To publicly testify against my own son, to potentially send him to prison. What kind of mother does that? But then I thought of those other names in his files. Elderly people who might not have family to protect them, who might not catch on to his manipulation until it was too late, who might lose everything they'd worked for to my son's calculated greed. I'll testify, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. But I need a few days first. After hanging up, I went to my desk and pulled out a sheet of stationery. There was something I needed to do before I could face a courtroom, something just between Richard and me. Dear Richard, I began, I'm writing to tell you that I will be testifying against you in criminal court. I want you to hear this from me directly, not from an attorney or police officer. What you did to me was cruel beyond measure. You made me question my own mind, my own memories. You isolated me from friends and family. You betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way possible. But that is not why I'm testifying. I'm testifying because I've seen the names of the others you were planning to deceive. People who might not have caught on in time. People who might have lost everything to you. When you were a child, I taught you that we have a responsibility to protect those who cannot protect themselves. I taught you that honesty and integrity matter more than money or possessions. Somewhere along the way, you forgot those lessons or chose to discard them. I cannot protect you from the consequences of your actions anymore. I cannot pretend this didn't happen or that it was a misunderstanding. To do so would make me complicit in what you might do to others in the future. I still love you, Richard. You are my son, and nothing can change that. But love without accountability isn't love at all. It's enablement. Perhaps someday you will. Understand that this letter, this decision comes from that love, not from vengeance or anger, but from the hope that you might yet become the person I raised you to be. Mom, I sealed the envelope, wrote his name on the front, and set it aside to mail in the morning. Then I returned to my garden, pulling on worn gloves and kneeling in the soft earth to tend the plants that had somehow survived the winter. As I worked, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. Not happiness exactly, but certainty. The future stretched before me, uncertain in many ways, but undeniably mine to shape. My home was secure. My mind was clear. My other children had rallied around me with love and support, and while I had lost one relationship in the most painful way imaginable, I had reclaimed something perhaps even more valuable: my sense of self. As the afternoon sun warmed my back, I dug my fingers into the cool soil and planted new seedlings, alongside the established perennials, a tangible promise to myself that there would be growth and beauty in the seasons to come, regardless of what storms had passed. The county courthouse stood imposing against the clear blue May sky, its granite, steps worn smooth by decades of footsteps seeking justice. I paused at the bottom, adjusting the lapel of my navy blue blazer, the one I'd worn to countless school board meetings and community events before Richard's campaign to discredit me had forced me into isolation. "Are you ready?" Hamilton asked, standing beside me. His familiar presence was a comfort, though nothing could fully ease the knot of anxiety in my stomach. I nodded, gripping my handbag a little tighter. Inside was Dr. Sharma's report, the document that had changed everything, along with a small silver pendant Edward had given me on our 25th anniversary. I'd begun wearing it again recently, drawing strength from the memories it carried. "As ready as I'll ever be to testify against my own son," I replied. Michael and Caroline flanked me as we climbed the steps, a protective formation that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. 3 weeks had passed since Richard's deception had been exposed. 3 weeks of rebuilding, reclaiming, and reckoning with painful truths. The district attorney had moved quickly once the extent of Richard's actions became clear. The evidence was substantial. Forged documents, unauthorized financial transfers, the surveillance equipment in my home, the recordings he'd edited to make me appear confused, and most damning of all, the files he'd compiled on other elderly victims he planned to target next. Inside the courtroom, I was struck by how ordinary it looked. Wood paneling, fluorescent lighting, uncomfortable benches. Somehow I'd expected the setting for such a momentous personal tragedy to be more dramatic. Caroline squeezed my hand as we settled into seats near the front. "Remember, Mom, you don't have to look at him if you don't want to," she whispered. But when the side door opened and Richard was led in by a court officer, I found I couldn't look away. My firstborn child, now a defendant in a criminal case. He wore a suit I recognized, the charcoal gray one I'd helped him select for job interviews after his previous firm had let him go. His hands were uncuffed, his bearing still confident, despite the circumstances. Our eyes met briefly before he turned away, jaw tightening. The proceedings began with formal charges: elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, grand larceny. The words echoed through the courtroom, clinical legal terms that somehow failed to capture the intimate betrayal they represented. How do you quantify in legal language what it feels like to have your child systematically dismantle your sense of self? When the district attorney called me to testify, I moved to the witness stand with deliberate steadiness. I'd dressed carefully that morning, selecting clothing that projected competence and clarity, a visual counterpoint to the confused, declining woman Richard had fabricated. "Mrs. Pembroke," the district attorney began, a compassionate woman in her 50s named Marianne Collins, "can you tell the court about when your son Richard came to live with you?" I recounted the story, my voice growing stronger as I spoke. Richard's return after his divorce, his gradual takeover of my home, the first incidents of gaslighting, hidden keys, moved objects, fabricated conversations. The escalation to more elaborate deceptions, the invented Christmas party, the recordings, the systematic isolation from friends and community. "And why do you believe your son did these things?" Ms. Collins asked. I looked directly at Richard for the first time since taking the stand. He stared back, his expression unreadable. "To gain control of my assets," I stated clearly. "My home worth approximately $750,000. My investment portfolio, valued at just over $1.2 million. My monthly pension. All things I had worked my entire life to secure." "And how did you discover what was happening?" I explained about the neurological evaluation, Dr. Sharma's comprehensive testing, the definitive report stating I had no cognitive impairment. I described finding the recording devices, confronting Richard with my other children present, discovering the unauthorized financial transfers. Throughout my testimony, I maintained eye contact with the jury, 6 men and 6 women of varying ages. I wanted them to see me clearly, to recognize me as a complete person, not the diminished caricature my son had tried to create. Richard's attorney, a sharp-featured man with cold eyes, approached for cross-examination. His strategy became immediately apparent to suggest that despite the medical report, I might still be experiencing episodes of confusion. "Mrs. Pembroke, isn't it possible that you simply don't remember certain conversations with your son? That your recollection might be selective?" "No," I replied firmly. "My memory is intact, as confirmed by extensive neurological testing." "But you initially doubted yourself, did you not? You started keeping notes, questioning your own recall of events?" "I did, because my son was deliberately manipulating my environment to make me doubt myself. That's what gaslighting is, a form of psychological manipulation designed to make the victim question their own sanity." He tried another approach. "Mrs. Pembroke, would you describe yourself as an overprotective mother?" I raised an eyebrow. "I raised 3 successful, independent children. I don't believe that qualifies as overprotective." And yet, when Richard experienced financial difficulties after his divorce, you immediately invited him to move in, gave him your master bedroom, began cooking his meals, mothering him, in essence. "I offered support to my child in a difficult time," I corrected. "That's not overprotection, it's parenting. Parenting doesn't end when your children become adults. And isn't it possible that Richard's concerns about your welfare were similarly motivated? That he genuinely believed you needed assistance managing your affairs?" I leaned slightly forward. If my son were genuinely concerned about my welfare, he would have discussed it openly with me. He would have suggested a medical evaluation immediately, not after months of psychological manipulation. He would have involved my other children from the beginning, not worked to isolate me from them. And he certainly wouldn't have forged my signature on financial documents or transferred my money into accounts I couldn't access. The attorney shifted tactics several more times, but couldn't shake my testimony. When I was finally excused from the stand, I returned to my seat feeling drained but unbowed. The prosecution called more witnesses. Dr. Sharma, who confirmed her findings of my cognitive health, the bank manager who documented the unauthorized transfers, the detective who discovered Richard's files on other potential victims, and finally, most surprisingly, Evelyn Winters, a 73-year-old widow who had been one of Richard's investment clients 5 years earlier. Mrs. Winters's testimony was eerily familiar. Richard had gained her trust, begun suggesting she was becoming forgetful, gradually isolated her from friends, and ultimately convinced her to liquidate her retirement accounts for safer investments that disappeared along with Richard. Unlike me, she had no children to help her, no one to notice what was happening until it was too late. "I lost everything," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "My retirement, my security. I had to sell my home and move in with my sister in Arizona. Mr. Pembroke knew I had no family nearby to protect me. That's why he chose me." When Richard took the stand in his own defense, I barely recognized him. Gone was the polished, confident financial advisor, replaced by a man projecting humble concern, occasionally dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. "I was worried about my mother," he insisted. "I noticed changes in her behavior. Forgetfulness. Confusion. I was trying to protect her." "By installing recording devices throughout her home?" Ms. Collins asked during cross-examination. "To monitor her for safety," he claimed. "I was afraid she might fall or become disoriented when alone." "And the unauthorized transfers from her accounts to yours?" "Temporary safeguarding of assets. I was going to reinvest them for her benefit." Each lie landed like a physical blow. This performance, this caricature of filial concern, was perhaps the cruelest deception yet. I found myself wondering how I could have raised someone capable of such calculated deceit. The trial lasted 3 days. When the jury retired to deliberate, Hamilton suggested we get lunch at a small cafe across from the courthouse. I couldn't eat, pushing salad around my plate while Michael and Caroline made stilted conversation, all of us avoiding the subject dominating our thoughts. We were halfway through our meal when Hamilton's phone buzzed. "They have a verdict," he said, looking surprised. That was fast. Back in the courtroom, I sat with my back straight, hands folded in my lap as the jury filed in. The foreman, a retired school principal about my age, stood when asked if they had reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor." The moment stretched, time seeming to slow as the judge reviewed the paperwork. Finally, he looked up. "On the count of elder abuse in the first degree, how do you find?" "We find the defendant guilty." "On the count of fraud exceeding $10,000, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the count of identity theft, how do you find?" "Guilty." The litany continued, guilt established on all counts. Richard stood motionless, his face a rigid mask as the verdict was read. I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sadness that we had come to this point. The judge set sentencing for the following month and ordered Richard taken into custody. As the court officer approached him, Richard suddenly turned toward me. "Mom?" he called out, desperation breaking through his composed facade. "You can stop this. Tell them you've changed your mind." I met his gaze steadily, my heart breaking, even as my resolve held firm. "I can't protect you from this, Richard. Not anymore." As they led him away, Caroline pressed against my side, her tears soaking into my sleeve. Michael stood rigid, one hand gripping the back of the bench so tightly, his knuckles whitened. In that moment, we were just a family shattered by choices that could never be unmade. Outside, reporters waited on the courthouse steps. I'd anticipated this. A case involving elder abuse by a financial professional against his own mother had attracted considerable media attention. Hamilton had prepared a brief statement, which I delivered with quiet dignity. Today's verdict cannot undo the damage that has been done, not just to me, but to other victims. Elder abuse often goes undetected because its perpetrators count on shame and isolation to silence their victims. I hope that by speaking out, I can encourage others in similar situations to seek help. As cameras flashed, a reporter called out, "Mrs. Pembroke, do you have any message for your son?" I paused, considering. Only that actions have consequences, and that the truth, however painful, is always preferable to comforting lies. That evening, alone in my garden as twilight softened the edges of the day, I finally allowed myself to weep, not just for what Richard had done, but for what he had become, for what our family had lost. The tears came in waves, washing away months of fear, doubt, and forced composure. A gentle voice broke through my grief. "Mom?" I looked up to find Caroline standing at the garden gate, 2 steaming mugs in her hands. She approached cautiously, as if afraid I might shatter, and settled beside me on the wooden bench Edward had built decades ago. "I thought you might need this," she said, offering one of the mugs. The rich aroma of hot chocolate rose between us, the same comfort drink I'd made for her after childhood disappointments. "How did you know?" I asked, accepting the warm cup gratefully. She smiled sadly. "You made it for us whenever our hearts were broken." I figured today qualified. We sat in companionable silence, watching fireflies begin their evening dance over the garden beds. Finally, Caroline spoke again. "I keep thinking about all those family dinners, holidays, birthdays. Was he always planning this? Was he always this person?" I considered her question carefully. "I don't think so. I think life disappointed Richard in ways he couldn't accept. His marriage failed. His career stalled. Rather than examining his own choices, he looked for someone to blame, something to take." I sighed deeply. "And I was convenient. But why you? His own mother?" "Because I trusted him completely," I said simply. "The perfect victim is always someone who loves you without question." Caroline's hand found mine, squeezing gently. "What happens now?" I looked out over my garden, where new growth was pushing through soil I'd recently turned. 3 beds were planted with vegetables, another with fresh herbs. Along the fence, rose bushes I'd pruned back severely were sprouting tender new canes. "Now we heal," I said. Differently, perhaps, than before, with clearer boundaries and harder-earned wisdom. But we heal nonetheless. As darkness settled fully around us, stars appearing one by one in the deepening blue above, I felt something shift within me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a quiet certainty that I would not allow this betrayal to define the rest of my life. Richard had tried to convince the world I was disappearing into confusion and decline. The greatest victory I could claim was to prove him wrong, not just in court, but in every day that followed, in every garden planted, every relationship nurtured, every moment lived with purpose and clarity. The truth had indeed changed everything. Not by erasing the pain, but by illuminating a path forward through it, one I would walk on my own terms, with my mind clear and my dignity intact. 6 months after the trial, I stood at my kitchen window watching golden autumn leaves drift across the yard. The Japanese maple Edward and I had planted for our 20th anniversary was ablaze with crimson, its reflection shimmering in the small pond we'd added the following spring. My world had transformed since those dark days when Richard had nearly convinced me and everyone else that my mind was failing. The doorbell chimed, pulling me from my reverie. I smoothed my hands over the soft cashmere sweater I'd treated myself to last week, a small luxury that symbolized my reclaimed independence, and went to answer. On my porch stood Judith Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s, briefcase in hand. As head of the county's newly formed Elder Justice Task Force, she'd contacted me several weeks ago about speaking at their upcoming symposium. "Mrs. Pembroke," she greeted me with a firm handshake. "Thank you for making time for me today." "Please," "Call me Eleanor," I said, ushering her inside. "And I've made tea." We settled in the sunroom, autumn light spilling across the wicker furniture and potted ferns I'd nursed back to health after months of Richard's deliberate neglect. The space felt wholly mine again. No surveillance devices, no rearranged belongings, no manufactured evidence of decline. "I've reviewed the transcript from your son's sentencing hearing," Judith began, accepting the cup I offered. "The judge's decision to make it a landmark case in elder exploitation has created ripples throughout the legal community. Richard had received 8 years, a sentence that reflected not just his crimes against me, but the premeditated nature of his actions and the evidence that he'd targeted others. The judge had cited a disturbing pattern of predatory behavior and a profound breach of familial trust in his ruling. The task force believes your story could help others recognize the warning signs of exploitation," Judith continued, "particularly when it comes from family members, which is often the hardest type to identify and report." I traced the rim of my teacup thoughtfully. For months, I doubted my own mind, because I couldn't imagine my son would deliberately manipulate me. That's what makes this type of abuse so insidious. It exploits the very trust that should protect us. Judith nodded. "Exactly. And your case highlights something we're seeing more frequently: financial exploitation disguised as concern for cognitive decline." We spent the next hour discussing the symposium and what my role might entail. As Judith prepared to leave, she paused by the collection of family photographs on my mantel, recently restored to their proper places after Richard had systematically removed them. "May I ask a personal question?" she said, studying a photo of Michael's family taken at last month's Labor Day barbecue. "How have you managed to maintain relationships with your other children after everything that happened?" It was a profound question, one I'd struggled with myself in the aftermath of Richard's betrayal. "With honesty," I replied, "and by refusing to let one broken relationship poison the others." Michael and Caroline weren't complicit in Richard's scheme. They were manipulated too, fed carefully curated misinformation about my condition. What I didn't add was how deeply we'd all had to work to rebuild trust. The family therapy sessions, where Caroline had broken down, confessing her shame at having believed Richard so readily. The long conversation with Michael where he'd admitted feeling guilty for not visiting more often, for not seeing through his brother's deception earlier. "And your grandchildren?" Judith asked gently. I smiled, thinking of Lily's recent soccer victory and how she'd run straight to me after scoring the winning goal, her face alight with triumph. Children are remarkably resilient when given honest, age-appropriate explanations. They understand that sometimes people make terrible choices and that those choices have consequences. After Judith left, I walked through my garden, now transitioning to its autumn state. The vegetable beds had been harvested, perennials cut, back bulbs planted for spring. Each task completed by my own hands, each decision made with clarity and purpose. The garden had become more than just a hobby. It was tangible proof of my continued competence, my enduring connection to this place. My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. "Still on for dinner tonight? Lily made dessert and she's very proud of it." I smiled, typing back. "Wouldn't miss it for the world. Tell her I'm bringing homemade ice cream to go with whatever masterpiece she's created." These weekly family dinners had become a cornerstone of our healing process, a reclaiming of ordinary joy after extraordinary pain. Sometimes Michael and his wife Jennifer joined us. Sometimes it was just Caroline and her children. But the ritual itself mattered. The steady reassurance that while one family bond had fractured beyond repair, others had emerged stronger. Later that afternoon, I drove to the local community center where I'd recently begun volunteering with a financial literacy program for seniors. The irony wasn't lost on me, that after nearly losing control of my own finances, I was now helping others protect theirs. "Eleanor!" Marge Williams, the program coordinator, greeted me with warmth. "We've got a full house today. Word about your workshop has been spreading." The meeting room was indeed filled beyond capacity, folding chairs added in the back to accommodate the crowd. Most attendees were my contemporaries, men and women in their 60s and 70s, some accompanied by adult children. But I also noticed a few younger faces, social workers, elder law attorneys, healthcare providers seeking to better serve their clients. I arranged my materials at the front of the room, conscious of how far I'd come from those dark days of isolation and self-doubt. The presentation I'd prepared was titled, Protecting Your Financial Independence, Recognizing and Preventing Exploitation. Good afternoon, I began, my voice clear and confident. My name is Eleanor Pembroke, and less than a year ago I almost lost everything to someone I trusted implicitly, my oldest son. A murmur rippled through the audience. Though my case had received media attention, hearing it stated so directly clearly caught some off guard. I continued, recounting my experience not as a shameful secret, but as a cautionary tale that might help others avoid similar pain. The most dangerous predators aren't strangers, I explained. They're the people who know your vulnerabilities, your assets, your routines. They're the ones who can exploit your trust because you never imagine they would harm you. Throughout the hour-long session, I outlined practical steps seniors could take to protect themselves. Regular financial check-ins with trusted advisors, transparent communication with family members about estate planning, careful documentation of valuable assets, establishing relationships with bank managers who could flag unusual activities. When I opened the floor for questions, a silver-haired man in the front row raised his hand. How do you handle the family dynamics now? I mean, with your other children? It was the second time that day someone had asked about this aspect of my experience, perhaps the most complex and painful part of the aftermath. With intention and boundaries, I answered honestly. We had to acknowledge what happened without letting it define us. My son made devastating choices, but those choices reflect on him, not on me, and not on his siblings. A woman toward the back spoke up next, her voice quavering slightly. I think something similar might be happening to my mother. My brother moved in with her after his job loss, and suddenly she's too confused to handle her bills, her medications. But when I visit, she seems fine. My heart ached for this stranger and her mother, another family potentially facing the same betrayal we had experienced. After the workshop concluded, I spoke with her privately, providing contact information for both Judith Chen's task force and Dr. Sharma, who had become an advocate for neurological evaluations in contested competency cases. Driving to Caroline's house that evening, I reflected on how my personal tragedy had gradually transformed into a platform for helping others. It wasn't the role I would have chosen, certainly not the legacy I'd imagined creating in my later years, but there was meaning in it nonetheless. A purpose born from pain. Caroline's home glowed with warm light against the gathering dusk. Through the front window, I could see Lily setting the table, carefully arranging napkins with the same focused expression she'd worn as a toddler stacking blocks. Her brother Jason lounged nearby, ostensibly helping but mostly scrolling through his phone in the way of 12-year-old boys everywhere. As I gathered my purse and the container of homemade strawberry ice cream, a notification appeared on my phone, an email from Hamilton with a subject line that made my breath catch, Update Richard's appeal. Richard had filed an appeal 3 months after sentencing, claiming ineffective counsel and challenging the admissibility of certain evidence. Hamilton had warned me this was likely, but had expressed confidence that the conviction would stand. Hesitated, my finger hovering over the notification. Part of me wanted to open it immediately, to know whether this chapter of my life would be extended through prolonged legal proceedings. Another part recoiled from any connection to Richard and the darkness he had brought into my life. In that moment of indecision, the front door of Caroline's house swung open. Lily spotted me sitting in the driveway and came bounding out, her dark braids bouncing. "Grandma! You're here! Come see what I made!" I tucked my phone away, unopened. Hamilton's email would wait. This moment, my granddaughter's excitement, the simple joy of a family dinner, deserved my full attention. Inside, the house was filled with the savory aroma of Caroline's lasagna and the comforting scent of garlic bread. Jason looked up from his phone long enough to offer a casual, "Hey, Grandma," before returning to whatever game had captured his interest. Caroline emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Perfect timing," she said, embracing me. "Dinner's almost ready." Lily tugged at my hand. "Come see my cake first. I did it all by myself. Well, Mom helped with the oven part." She led me proudly to the dining room, where a slightly lopsided chocolate cake sat in the center of the table, decorated with multicolored sprinkles and surrounded by handwritten place cards. I noticed with a pang that she had made one for everyone, including her Uncle Michael and Aunt Jennifer, who weren't joining us tonight. But there was no place card for Richard. No space held in anticipation of his return. In the natural wisdom of children, Lily had accepted our new family configuration without the complicated grief that sometimes still ambushed the adults. Throughout dinner, I found myself observing Caroline with new appreciation. She moved through her home with confidence, managing her children's competing needs, maintaining conversation, creating this stable environment despite the family trauma we had all endured. I saw in her the resilience I had tried to model, the strength that emerges not despite adversity, but because of it. "Mom?" Caroline's voice broke through my thoughts. "You seem distracted. Is everything okay?" I considered mentioning Hamilton's email, but decided against it. "Just reflecting," I said, "on how fortunate I am to be here, with all of you, with my mind clear and my future my own." Later, after Lily's cake had been served with my homemade ice cream. After the kitchen had been cleaned and the children had disappeared to their rooms, Caroline and I sat on her back porch with glasses of wine. The night air carried the crisp scent of autumn, a reminder of nature's constant cycles of ending and beginning. "I saw on the community newsletter that you're speaking at the Elder Justice Symposium next month," Caroline said. "How does that feel?" I considered her question carefully. "Necessary," I finally answered. "Not always comfortable, but necessary." "Are you afraid?" she asked, her voice softening. "Of seeing him again someday, after he's released?" The question struck at the heart of something I rarely allowed myself to contemplate. In the approximately 6 years remaining of Richard's sentence, I would turn 75. By the time he walked free, I would be approaching my 80s, potentially, more vulnerable than I had been when his deception began. Sometimes, I admitted. Not of physical harm, but of emotional manipulation. "He's very good at it, Caroline. He had everyone fooled, doctors, lawyers, neighbors, family. Even you." She nodded, pain flickering across her face. "I've thought a lot about why I believed him so easily. Part of it was his authority. He always sounded so certain. But I think part of it was also convenience." Convenience? It was easier to believe you were declining than to consider the alternative, that my brother was capable of such calculated cruelty. She looked away, shame evident in her posture. Easier to think about managing your condition than to imagine confronting him. I reached for her hand. We all failed each other in different ways. But we're here now, rebuilding. That's what matters. We sat in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. After a while, Caroline spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "You know what I realized recently? When Richard was telling everyone you had dementia, he wasn't just attacking your present. He was trying to erase your future. All those plans you had, all the things you still wanted to do. He was trying to replace them with his narrative." Her insight struck me profoundly. In the months since the trial, I had reclaimed my home, my finances, my relationships, but perhaps most importantly, I had reclaimed my vision of what my remaining years could hold. Instead of the institutional care Richard had planned for me, I was creating a life of continued purpose and engagement. Just last week, I had enrolled in a botanical illustration course at the community college, fulfilling a creative interest I'd set aside decades ago while raising children and building a career. I had booked a trip to visit Diane in Arizona for the winter. I had begun researching volunteer opportunities with a literacy program at the elementary school. These weren't grand ambitions, but they were mine, chosen freely, pursued with clarity and intention. When I finally returned home that night, I sat at my kitchen table and opened Hamilton's email. The news was, as I had hoped, Richard's appeal had been denied. The conviction stood firm, the sentence unchanged. I closed my laptop and moved to the window, looking out at my garden silvered by moonlight. The Japanese maple stood as a silent sentinel, its leaves rustling gently in the night breeze. Beyond it, the neighborhood slept peacefully, windows dark, the occasional porch light illuminating a welcome home. This house that had nearly become my prison was fully my sanctuary again. The doctor's report that had given me back my story had also, unexpectedly, given me a new one, a narrative not of victimhood, but of advocacy, not of vulnerability, but of hard-won wisdom. Tomorrow, I would begin gathering materials for my presentation at the symposium. I would call Evelyn Winters, the previous victim whose testimony had been so crucial at Richard's trial, and invite her to speak alongside me. Together, our voices would be stronger, our experiences illuminating a problem too, often hidden behind closed doors and family secrets. But tonight, in this quiet moment, I allowed myself to acknowledge both the pain and the progress of the past year. My son had told everyone I had dementia to take control of my assets, but the doctor's report had changed everything, not by simply proving him wrong, but by setting me on a path to something I might never have discovered otherwise. The power of speaking truth, even when that truth breaks your heart. I ran my fingers over Dr. Sharma's report, still kept in my desk drawer, as a reminder of the day clarity returned. Not just medical clarity about my cognitive health, but the profound clarity that comes from seeing a situation, and the people in it, exactly as they are, without illusion or denial. It was not the future I had imagined for myself at 68, but it was a future entirely my own, built on foundations stronger than betrayal, more enduring than grief. And that, perhaps, was the most unexpected outcome of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.